Hi, Mark here. Today I'm going to look at a comparative diagnosis of Cryptolestes ferrugineus and Cryptolestes pusillus using cheap digital microscopes. Both of these species are commonly found in grain storage across Australia. A third species, Cryptolestes pusilloides, is very rarely found. The species are fairly similar looking in general, around about 2 millimeters long, rusty brown color. There are some differences in the sexes, most notably Cryptolestes pusillus with the males having long antennae. The equipment I'm going to use is this microscope, some blue post-it notes, a scale bar, dissecting needle, and a brush. Now, what I'll do first is put a post-it note sticky side up, and I'll place a scale bar on there. The first thing I want to do is to get a measurement of the size of these things. So I'll take a specimen out and place it onto the sticky side of the post-it note next to the scale bar. And the post-it note stickiness lets you move the specimen around so that you can get it on the orientation that you want. So I'll put it back up, and looking under the microscope here on low power, I'll take an image of this and I will transfer that onto my PC. Now, to work out the size of this, I'm just going to use Microsoft Paint, which should be on just about every Windows PC. And I'll measure across 5 millimeters of the scale bar using the line draw tool. And you'll notice down the bottom of the screen there is a measurement of the X and Y displacement in pixels that changes as you draw that line. Now you can take these numbers and you can copy them into Excel, and then you can use Pythagoras' theorem to work out the length in pixels of that 5 millimeter section. Then going back onto the image, you can go to the beetle and you can measure from tail to head the distance in pixels using the same method. Just copy those numbers back into Excel and get the pixel measurement. Now you can then work out the number of millimeters per pixel, and you can multiply that by the number of pixels in the specimen to give you an estimate of the length, and this is generally pretty good, to around about 1/10 of a millimeter. So the size is not a great differentiator of the two species, but pusillus is generally under 2 millimeters, while ferrugineus is generally larger. So the next feature we'll look at is the antennae. Now, with the male Cryptolestes pusillus, they all have the same number of antennal segments, but the segments are elongated in pusillus. If you look at the female ferrugineus, you'll see that the segments are quite rounded. So they're intermediate in the other two examples here. The next feature is looking at the pronotum. Now with pusillus, you find that the pronotum is generally a bit wider than it is long. So we'll use the same method before with Microsoft Paint. We'll just measure across the pronotum and measure down the pronotum and look at that width to length ratio, and we see here it's 1.21. So looking at a few other specimens, you'll see that pusillus is generally sort of up around that 1.2 area, whereas ferrugineus is closer to 1. Now the next thing we'll look at is a feature that's on the head of Cryptolestes pusillus, and that's the transverse sulcus. Now what I'll do is I'll put a specimen back on the sticky note, and I'll take a cover slip and I'll position that cover slip on the pronotum of the beetle. I'll just do that by hand first, and once the cover slip's on the pronotum, then that holds the specimen in place. And what I'll do is I'll just use a dissecting needle to knock the head off the pronotum. Now, if we zoom in on this, we'll see that Cryptolestes ferrugineus, even though there's a bit of a mark there where the head joins the pronotum, it's not as pronounced as the groove that you see on Cryptolestes pusillus. This is the transverse sulcus, and it's one of the best identifying features. Now there's a fair bit of variation between specimens, but you'll start to get a bit of an idea. And with all these things, it's always good to look at as many specimens as possible when you're trying to make a diagnosis, just to take into account the variation that can be there. So That's it for looking at the diagnosis. There are some other resources around. Have a look at Paddle, have a look at the images on there, and also on the GRDC website for stored grains. This web page also has diagnosis of Pusilloides. And with all these things, it depends on how important your diagnosis is, whether or not you're happy with it. Get to know your level of skill, get to know the importance of the decisions that you need to make. And if you're in doubt, make sure you consult a taxonomist who specializes in this area. Okay, thanks very much. Bye.